Good morning and welcome to another edition of Berno's News and Views, election edition. And today we are very privileged to have with us the leader of the Free Democratic Movement, Marc Bean. Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Burgess. How are you?
Well, lovely. Thank you. And yourself?
Fine. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you here. It's been a bit of a tricky situation to get it, but we arrived at the line here.
Yes. And my apologies. But let's proceed.
Okay. Just going to take a couple steps back. When did you start forming the FDM?
The FDM was formed, I would say, the day that the premier dropped the writ to call an election. That's when it really started taking genesis. And then I think it was the Tuesday or Sunday to Tuesday period before we released our website. It's when we started having our initial organizational meetings. And then we released our website, and now here we are. So within about 3 weeks, September 1st, you can say.
Had you been thinking about this before then?
Yes, it's always on your mind, analyzing the political environment, the political situation in the country, pre and post COVID. You know, you always have to consider the various options based on, you know, what the positioning of the country, where is that, and what are the policies and direction that the current government is undertaking, and also what are the responses from the current opposition. It made it clear that there is a gap in democracy in the country. It's a widening gap. And so we had to give deep thought as to if perchance the premier exercises his right to call a snap election, what will be the response? Right. You know, and so after he did call the election, and I listened to the rationale that he provided, and he said that he is seeking another mandate when he already has 2511 within the House. You know, I had to really meditate on that and say, well, I know the premier, so what is he really saying? And the response I got within myself was that this isn't, this is not positive. It's not a positive occurrence for the country. And so looking at the environment, it dawned on me that now is the time to take a step to ensure that democracy is upheld and our children and grandchildren have a future, because things can get extremely difficult anyway, regardless, in this post-COVID environment. So we need to have the best and brightest on deck so we can navigate out of this thunderstorm. And the Free Democratic Movement has been formed to participate in that activity to help save ourselves.
Right. Because there's been some people going around on social media and things saying, like, part of the reason why the premier called this now, he'd sort of gotten a whiff that you were thinking about forming a political party, and that there was going to be an election called before December anyway, because the economy next year is not going to be good. And that was sort of like a political move to sort of deter the FDM, whatever it was going to be called at that point.
It's flattering to hear, but I'm not one that's, you know, taken by flattery. So to be honest, I don't think the premier used our potential formation as the reason for calling it. I think that if it was any pressure, it wasn't external pressure. The pressure was coming from within the Progressive Labor Party, to my understanding, because people have to be cognizant of the fact that according to the constitution of the Progressive Labor Party, October is delegates conference. And delegates conference is when persons can challenge the premier for leadership and the deputy premier for leadership. And so I think that if there was any reason that the premier used or called this election, it wasn't because of Marc Bean, it was because of some internal threats that exist, where there's a desire to use the delegates conference to attempt to remove him. That's the only thing that I could, the word that I've received, that's probably the real reason that he did it. In addition to, as you say, the need to get ahead of the recovery, the economic recovery, and needing to get another mandate from the people, knowing that it's going to be increasingly difficult over the next few years. And so he's seeking to, I would think, minimize electoral risk in terms of calling it early. But then it's a double-edged sword, because even if you call it now, in 2-3 years' time, if the conditions are that bad in the country, and I hope to God that is not, but if it is, then sometimes you wouldn't have no choice but to call another election anyway. So in the end, what a man proposes doesn't always determine what's actually going to be revealed, in time. Sometimes it's out of our control.
Yeah. How do you assess how bad things are going to be next year? I mean, not to be pessimistic, but we've had the Chamber of Commerce say 8% of retail businesses in Dockyard and the city and St. George's, as well as North Hamilton, have permanently closed. And we had the not really a bombshell, because we've been hearing rumors of it, that Fairmont Southampton was going to renovate, a loss of 700 plus jobs.
It's not about being pessimistic, it's about being realistic. And the reality is, I think we all can agree that it's going to become more or increasingly difficult for people in this country to feed, clothe, and shelter themselves. And being on the doorstep now, and I'm sure most candidates across the island are reporting the same, and that is that the people are suffering. They were suffering before COVID, and the sufferation has increased since COVID. And so, yeah, the next year is going to be very difficult, right? It's not going to be no laughing matter at all. And so we actually need to start considering what are the ways, what are the policies that we have to introduce into the economy to ensure that we have a fighting chance. Because we have to realize that when it rains, it's not just going to rain on one person's roof. We're all going to get wet, right? And yeah, we will all get wet. And so we have to be realistic, knowing that while the global economy has been reset and is being reset, our actions, the way we think and act, will determine our destiny. And for the Free Democratic Movement, we feel that the more free and open a society is in this time will allow us to be the most prosperous. So you have some governments are using COVID to increase the centralization of government, to increase government's fingerprints on society. We feel that we have to take the opposite direction. Government has to be made smaller. More emphasis has to be putting in trust in the people themselves to do for themselves. And we have to start thinking differently in terms of becoming a freer society. Instead of saying no, we need to start saying yes. And that applies internally, domestically, and it also applies to our relationship in terms of immigration and how we relate to the rest of the world. The more open and free we are, the more prosperous we will be. And that's something that the Free Democratic Movement would like to emphasize, that from a policy prescription or policy approach, we think that that would be the wisest approach so we can help our country help themselves.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of people, they were concerned about COVID and protecting people and making sure people were healthy and safe, but a lot of them were also concerned about the loss of civil liberties.
Yes, and not just civil liberties. I would say that it was always a challenge. Okay, it was a question of healthcare versus hunger. Health versus economics, basically. But on top of that, I'm glad you mentioned it, that we have seen through this post-COVID environment, governments receive an extraordinary power, unconstitutional powers, under the guise of protecting their citizenry, to be able to, basically put in rules and measures that restrict the movement and sometimes even the thought and expression of their citizens. When I look at the Caribbean, what I've noticed is that every single prime minister or president or premier have been following the World Health Organization mandates and dictates, but some have outdone the others. Okay, so not everyone has took that cookie cutter approach. I would say that in the Bahamas, Dr. Menace has been much more stringent in terms of taking measures on the Bahamian people compared relatively to Premier Brett. Excuse me. Relative to Premier Brett. And then you will look at St. Lucia, for instance, and Alan Chastanet, who is the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, has took a lighter touch approach. It's for history to record and to determine which approach is the best. But what I do know is that history has always indicated that when the opportunity presents itself for leaders to restrict the freedom of their citizens, it always leads to dictatorship. Okay, it's never beneficial to any country. And so we have to be very careful, not just in Bermuda, not just within the Caribbean region, but worldwide, to ensure that whatever powers we gave voluntarily to our leaders needs to be clawed back at the earliest convenience, at the very earliest convenience. And that's going to be determined based on the relationship of the people of that particular jurisdiction and the leadership of that particular jurisdiction. Yeah. But the sooner we get back to respecting the rule of law and ensuring that our people have their basic fundamental rights restored, then the faster we can get move along the path towards peace and prosperity. We will not have peace if we're locked down. Mm-hmm. And we certainly cannot have prosperity if we're locked down. And so we have to find that balance, Mr. Bridges.
Yeah. The part of the thing is part of the guiding principles that you have include limited government, individual rights, and equality. How does this all play into the COVID situation?
And it's timely. It's timely. It's a reminder. We're trying to remind people of what works, what policies are essential to helping people help themselves, having peace within their society. And the Free Democratic Movement's ethos is about limited government, smaller government, less interference by government, and shifting the power from government to the people themselves. So, I'm sorry. Somebody's still calling me on my phone. I'm talking to you from my phone. My apologies.
No worries.
But the Free Democratic Movement, our principles are based on universal best practice.
Okay. Getting back to formulating the party, what challenges did you find in fielding candidates so quickly with such a short timeline?
Oh, well, I don't think it's ever been done before, to be honest. Being able to put together just 15 candidates within a 5 to 7 day period. Right. It was very challenging in the sense that we had a core group of persons, and then there were some people that I was seeking to be part of the team, but for whatever reason, they were not able to proceed with it. Some who are close to me politically. It has its challenges, I must say that, because we are trying to build a team spirit within 2 weeks. It's very difficult, especially when you're establishing an institution based on sound principles and an idea of what direction you want to go. That requires reasoning. And sometimes we haven't had that opportunity to really hash out every single thing that, will really signify what and who the FDM is. But at the same time, that requires patience. It requires tolerance. It requires an openness to accept ideas from all angles. And so if people will know that if you were to describe me as, in the Western sense, what is my politics, it's classical liberal. Not quite, but it's classical liberal. It's free market based. But we have persons who are candidates who will say that, look, our position is social democratic. And so it's interesting. It's interesting. And as a result, we have had to create the idea that as a flattish organization, we are going to be open to consensus building and accept all ideas from all angles, because eventually we have to ask the question, what works and what is best for us collectively. You know, so we have to put the ideology aside and just use common sense. And I think that that's what the FDM has had to adjust to quickly. In spite of it all, we have had some challenges over that 2 week period, but I think that it's still positive. And I would say this, if I had an extra week to organize, I think I would have been able to roll out 36 candidates. Just an extra 7 days, and I would have been able to bring out 36 candidates, because the level of engagement from the people, once they saw us roll out, was very, very strong. And we attracted a cross section of quality, grassroots, professionals, black, white, middle class, wealthy, lower income persons, really a snapshot of or a good representation of the country as a whole. And if you had had an extra few days, we would have been able to provide 36 candidates, which would have been excellent for democracy in the country.
I looked at the candidates, and knowing some of their political views and things, I was thinking, wow, this is like a big tent philosophy.
Yeah.
Bring everybody in, and then sort of like deal with all these different philosophies and have them sort of like mold and shape each other.
Yes, and that's where consensus building comes from. You know, being able to reason and allowing persons to express themselves, and through the reasoning mind, we will get to the best position that we think represents the country. And so the FDM is basically like this, Mr. Burgess.
Yeah.
If you are founded upon sound principles, and once everyone can buy into the principles and the values, then you should be able to give them the freedom to express themselves according to their conscience. And that's what the Free Democratic movement represents.
Did some of those challenges of getting people all on the same page to agree to something, did that play a part in Ms. Palacio resigning?
You have to ask Ms. Palacio her rationale and reasons for resigning and withdrawing. I am not in a position to speak on it in detail, because I consider it a matter that she can address if she so chooses.
Okay.
But certainly, Ms. Palacio has a philosophical approach that is a little contrary to myself, but a lot of people have a philosophical approach that's a little contrary to myself. But that was fine, because just like others in the group, we had a desire to find that consensus or middle ground.
The one thing that I've heard people ask is, like, who's the deputy leader of the FDM?
We do not have a deputy leader yet. We have a group of leaders who bring leadership to the table. We have Ms. Patrice Minus, who has been invaluable. She brings a tremendous amount of experience to the table. You have Eugene Dean, you have Michelle Packwood, all persons who, you know, and actually the whole team are leaders in their own right, you know. But in terms of this election cycle, clearly you had to have someone to represent and take the lead, and that was myself. But after the election, depending on if we win any seats or if we win multiple seats, we are going to proceed anyway to institutionalizing the Free Democratic movement. And that means that we will be providing a constitution and rules and bylaws in which we would then open up our membership to the wider community. Because the idea is the FDM has not been created to fight or challenge for this election. We just came in because we required, the country required it at this time. But our goal is to be fully functional and fully ready for the next election. And at that time, we'll be focused on attaining government.
Right. I saw like some people were worried or maybe concerned, like you're here now, but you won't be here in 3 to 5 years' time. You want to dispel that completely, correct?
Well, people thought they hadn't gone 3 years ago.
All right.
And personally, I'm back, you know, so yeah. I don't know. I think I lost.
We're straight again.
Okay, back up. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, the Free Democratic movement has been created ultimately for the younger generation and the children who are not yet born. I feel that the One Bermuda Alliance is on a downward spiral, and ultimately we're going to see a situation where you have the FDM and the Progressive Labor Party as the two main political entities in the country. So yeah, I just leave it.
Well, part of the thing, now that you opened the door to the barn there, the OBA only fielded 31 candidates, and it looked like a lot of them were fielded at the last minute to give them that many. Do you think like they're ready to die out or dissipate?
Well, I'll tell you what, Thursday will give the people of this country the opportunity to help them decide whether they should continue or they should dissipate. That's up to the electorate because we are in an election cycle. But at the same time, I would think that the leadership of the One Bermuda Alliance will have a realistic reasoning with themselves as to what role are they bringing or what role are they fulfilling at this time in terms of enhancing democracy. I would like to see eventually, as I said, persons being able to vote based on ideology and not race. And the
Right.
Free Democrats movements, our presence has basically neutralized any racialism in this election. I think some people have noticed it and appreciated that just our presence has changed the dynamic on how our elections and how our politics hopefully can be shifted to a more positive standing.
Talk about the issues rather than racial identity.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, not just racial identity politics is being used as a tool of divide and rule across the world today. Whatever the division is, it could be on sexuality, it could be on gender, it could be on race, it could be on geographical land of birth, it doesn't matter. But there are persons in this world who feed like vampires on dividing and ruling humanity, whether it's at a local level or at a national or international level. And so identity politics is that vehicle by which humanity can continuously be divided up. And once you're divided up, you're easily manipulated. Okay, so that's where there is so much risk today as a result of the current environment.
Now, yesterday you sort of answered back on your mask statement that was sort of widely criticized. Can you clarify your position on face masks?
Sure, sure. I was asked, what was my position on my response to COVID. And in my analysis or in my response, I feel that it's important to inculcate into people's minds the health and wellness and the need to breathe in fresh air. Because if you don't breathe in fresh air, Mr. Burgess, I'm sure within, a minute, you're dead. That's how serious it is about having to breathe fresh air. So my focus was on those outside of these restricted environments, outside of properties that say you need to wear a mask when you enter. That's not any discussion. People or everyone has been abiding by those rules. But common sense, when we're talking about health and wellness, as a government, I would encourage people to exercise more, eat better, and breathe fresh air instead of locking us down, restricting our movement, driving us to the supermarket to load up with ice cream and junk food and all these other things that once we consume, it can actually weaken our immune system even more. I think that we could have took a more health and wellness approach, and we still should take a health and wellness approach. Now, myself, I have had to travel back to this from Miami, okay, Florida, the so-called epicenter and of the outbreak of COVID-19. I was there for a whole month and a half, and I've took the 5 tests in Bermuda since I've been back, and I took a test in Miami before I got on the aircraft. In other words, I have abided by the rules that's been put on us or imposed on us by various governments, and I'm not saying break the rules, but I'm asking people to use their common sense. Now, if also, Mr. Burgess, that if the Progressive Labor Party have such an angst towards what I had to say, and they pulled it out of an hour conversation on TNN that was wide ranging. If the issue is of a mask or wearing masks, I would like to know what is the actual mask policy of the Progressive Labor Party, because just 2 months ago, you had two ministers, one who was actually at the forefront of putting in these same rules we talked about earlier. And they showed up at Blue Restaurant with friends and family, and they had a ball. They had a good time. All right. And they broke apparently every single rule that was imposed by the same ministers and government on the rest of us as a community. But they went and broke it. So the question is, what is the real policy of the Progressive Labor Party in terms of masks? Is it do what I say and not what I do? Or is it that, we can do what we like over here, but we're going to impose rules on you over there? It doesn't make sense. It's incoherent. And that is the challenge when putting in laws and rules that in a lot of ways, don't square with the common sense of the people, because even as a leader, you end up breaking the rules that you created. Yeah. And now some people would say, well, those ministers suffered the punishment where they had to resign. Now, that's a political slap on the wrist. You broke laws that you're holding everyone else to account for, right? Yeah. That means the only remedy for that is a court appearance. That's everyone else who broke the laws had to go before court. Yeah. And so when you look at that hypocrisy, I suggest that the Progressive Labor Party respectfully go back and consider what the real policy is, because as of this filming, it's still hypocritical and the people could see right through it.
But don't you think by them being removed as ministers and now they're on a MP salary, that's a pretty hefty cost in that regard?
No.
That certainly
because you can't dismiss the course of the rule of law based on a couple.
I hate when that happens to my iPhone.
Yeah, man. And I'm sorry.
No worries.
No way, no chance. I said it's a slap on the wrist.
Well,
you can't go for 4 or 5 months pointing fingers and talking to senior citizens and every other citizen in the country. Don't tear it. Don't do this. Remember all of that? All these memes and the ministers coming out and talking to us like we're children. Remember these young ladies who were down on the beach and they got really grilled and exposed for having a little beach party at night because they weren't socially distanced or something like that. They didn't have a mask and they were crucified, right, by the same government. And then that same government goes and, acts as if, that it doesn't apply to them or their friends or family. That's not governance. So when you're talking about what I say, it was a adequate punishment. It's a political slap on the wrist. Sorry. That's all. That's all. If you had proper punishment, then the law would have been applied without partiality, because there are citizens in this country who have been punished by the law. I think fined, right? A lot of money, $3,000, $4,000, something, $2,500, right? And for the same thing or less. Some people got fined for trying to feed themselves, going scuba diving or snorkeling to catch some fish or a lobster illegally. But he was trying to feed himself. Okay? But he got fined, right? But yet we have government ministers who are actually responsible for applying or implementing the law, or applying the law, creating the law and the rules, who then go in and flout those rules. So good governance requires you to lead by example. Say what you mean what you say, and then live it. And that's where the current government, on their position on face masks, is totally hypocritical and out of order.
Well, I would agree, with the point of them trying to have people wear face masks and then being caught in doing that sends the wrong message. But at the same time, what's a cabinet minister salary? Was what, 130,000, 120,000?
No, cabinet minister salary with the MP salary, I think, is up about $160,000. $160,000.
And then being dropped to a MP salary. That's How much of a pay?
Well, listen, I don't
$100,000?
know their personal positions, but I don't think Minister De Silva has a real issue of, losing his ministerial salary.
Okay.
He's been a beneficiary of being so close within the Progressive Labor Party over the years. That's just a drop in the bucket. That ministerial salary, Minister or Zane De Silva, he hands that out in donations throughout the community and to certain churches in his constituency like that. Now, in terms of Keynes, again, I don't think that's a major issue. It's not a financial issue for either of those gentlemen, right? It's an issue of their reputation.
Right.
That's what's been challenged. And again, it's interesting that they got punished, but the premier knew about this event prior to. And so under the idea of collective responsibility, he should have told those two ministers, even though they should have had the common sense not to do it, right? He should have told them and warned them, listen, that is not what you can do. That's not, you shouldn't do it. I'm not approving it. I'm stepping it in and I'm putting a stop to it. He didn't. And it makes you wonder who are the MPs within the PLP who are measuring the premier up at the delegates conference to remove him. I'm just putting that out there because it could be a simple addition. 1 + 1 = 2, and 2 + 1 = 3.
Yeah. Okay. Nancy Monis, who's listening, wants to know about the FDM immigration policy.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad that you asked. Our FDM, our policies are going to be released either today or tomorrow morning. By 7, my wife tells me, she's like, by 7 o'clock.
Okay.
Right, so I would ask everyone to go to our website where you'll be able to see more detailed information on our 7 or 8 policies.
7 tomorrow night or 7 tomorrow morning? Sorry.
This evening, hopefully it's tonight. Yeah.
So, okay, all right.
But our focus is around the idea of 7.
Okay.
7 years where we see that we need to have a more open immigration policy, but we're not going to seek to attract. Our policy isn't focused on attracting new persons to the country like through commercial immigration, right? Our focus is on rectifying the injustices of persons who have been born in this country. We feel that they should have access, if they are continuous resident in this country, they should have access to status or citizenship, depending on the level of maturity over the next few years if the people want to decide to move towards independence, right? But there are about 7 key areas that speak to rectifying some of these historic injustices. And people might say, well, how are you going to allow just anyone to become get status by birth? Well, it's not anyone. There are caveats. For instance, if you were born here and your family has been resident for 7 years, they are eligible for status also. So you should also be eligible to status, for instance. We all know in every constituency, we have persons who were born and raised and no other spot in the world as their place of home, what they call home. And many of them are from the Portuguese community, but there are others from the Caribbean and other places that have also have become stateless because of our immigration rules. What we are proposing is finally putting an end to that and allowing these persons to become full-fledged status holders in the country of their birth. It really makes sense. I mean, how many of us went to school with someone that we all know them, we've been primary school with them, we've been high school with them, we played football with them, we played netball with them, and every sense of the word they're Bermudian. They sound more Bermudian than anybody. But when you realize that they're stateless, come on. Isn't it right and just for us to let our friends that we know all these years have the opportunity to have a passport and the right to vote? And come on, let's be a little bit more open-minded, okay, and embrace those that we already know to be our friends and family. And so our policies also apply in other areas. For instance, you have people or children who are born to a Bermudian spouse and are born outside of Bermuda. Okay, you might, yeah, I'm sorry, not a Bermuda spouse, but you have a Bermuda parent who
Right.
has a child, and that child was born outside of Bermuda. We are suggesting that that child should have the opportunity to get status and the right to live and work in Bermuda because they are a child, a son or daughter of the soil. Okay, rather it's the mother or the father. And so our policy is meant to be balanced, but also fair and open. And when I say balance, there's another policy that we're going to be promoting in terms of entertainment and the tourism industry. We feel strongly that culture is the center of our tourism product. And in terms of culture, we're speaking about food in particular, but entertainment. We knew the Gene Steeds and the Bermuda Strollers and all those, icons of our tourism industry of days gone by. They disappeared, and now today we don't have a tourism product. We need to create more emphasis in getting the natural talent that we have in this country in terms of music, right? And put them and use and merge them within the tourism product to give them a platform to learn their skills, make money, feed their children, and hopefully use that as a launching pad to an international career. And so in order to do that, we need to protect our homegrown musicians.
Right.
We need to be able to say, listen, hotels or any other establishment, if you want to have live entertainment, that person needs to be a Bermudian first. And if you're not able to get a Bermudian to do it, then you can start looking a little bit more broader. But we need to put greater emphasis on developing the culture of our country, the culture of our people. And that means facilitating them and, yes, giving a degree of protection at the immigration level to ensure that they can get work and they can live and use their talents to strengthen their families.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what I mean by balance. We're open on one side, in a lot of ways, but then we also are practical and know that people in this country need an opportunity to survive in their own country without being sacrificed for others.
Part of the thing is going to be a little bit more difficult for the musicians entertainers over the next 2 years, especially with the Fairmont closing, because like everyone talked about the 750 or 700 jobs at the Fairmont, Southampton Fairmont that's closed, but then there's all the ancillary things like the musicians, they won't have a venue to play at for the next 18 months. So it makes it more difficult for them as well.
Yes, our tourism is going to be very challenging unless we be a little bit more.
Your phone's not cooperating again.
Yeah.
I don't know what I've had that happen to me multiple times where I've been filming something and all of a sudden it flips to a side. I haven't touched it.
And it's a shame because this is one of my candidates calling, not realizing that I'm on Burn News talking to the people.
I've got 3 more questions after this, and then I'll let you get back to your busy schedule.
Sure. You mentioned about tourism and Southampton Princess closing. Yeah, that's a major blow. Okay, and it just speaks to the fact that as a country, we are about to enter into a serious thunderstorm. Okay, and it's so important for us to figure out what approach, what actions we're going to take as a country to navigate around that storm. In terms of tourism, overall, yes, tourism is one of the service sectors that is going to take is a major impact, a negative impact in terms of that service sector. And we have to be willing to be a little bit more flexible and freer if we can, even in a post-COVID environment, to make this country attractive for people to come and spend their money. I think Airbnb could be very popular in a post-COVID environment because many persons might be reluctant to go and be part in a hotel environment because they might be concerned in terms of being socially distanced from such large groups of people. But yes, Mr. Bridges, it's going to be challenging, even when it comes to the airport. With tourism falling off, we can see that the payments for this airport, the burden of payments for the airport is going to continue to rise because it was already difficult to imagine how we were going to get that type of level of traffic in the first place before COVID. But now we can see that the traffic levels coming through the airport are going to be severely depressed. which means that it's going to end up coming out of the consolidated fund every day. We are going to have to pay for it, right? And so that I'm just saying all that to say that we are in a very, very difficult environment for all service industries, but especially tourism. And we need to be able to be as innovative as possible to attract people to this country. People, if instead of locking down the country, like some places are, we need to use balance. We have to have balance. We have to balance the equation of healthcare and hunger. Okay, hunger is more long term. It has a more negative impact on the people, and every government's going to have to find that balance. Healthcare measures or ensuring that the people are fed, clothed, and sheltered.
Right.
Okay, and because when it comes to this equation, I'm going to tell you this: you cannot tell a hungry man to be concerned about his health. Okay, because he's hungry, and so as far as he's concerned, he feels unhealthy in the first place. Okay, so that means we're going to have to find that balance and be patient with one another and be willing to be innovative and do all that we can in this post-COVID environment to get money flowing in this country. And that allows me to segue back into the latest, I forgot her name, her question about immigration.
Right.
Over the short term, we need human capital into the country. We absolutely do. The remote, what is it called? The remote workers visa is a good idea. Borrow it from Barbados, but it's still a good idea. We need to be more open to having more people in the country. I'll tell you what the problem is, historically, and I'm going to be frank. When Black Bermuda hears about immigration, Black Bermuda perceives themselves being marginalized. Someone's come to take their job. White Bermuda says, no, we need more people because more people allows for more spending and more a higher GDP, et cetera, et cetera. White people in Bermuda are saying, listen, this is the way we eat food as a country. We rely on foreign capital. And so what the FDM is saying is, listen, instead of being a zero-sum game, why don't we encourage that part of the population who has a phobia towards immigration to see how they themselves can directly benefit from immigration? So if white Bermuda is saying, look, more foreign persons in, we benefit from it. We need to be able to have the conversation to say, well, listen, Black Bermuda, more foreign people in, this is how you benefit from it. And oh, by the way, those foreigners don't have to just come from America or Europe.
Right.
Those foreigners don't have to just come from Bangladesh or Philippines or India. They could come from the Caribbean. They could come from the African continent. In fact, the majority of our accounting firms, the big four in Bermuda, right? The majority of that staff, until are highly qualified African people. Okay, now if these are accountants, as you know, are persons that facilitate business development in a country. They facilitate international relationships. So we need to encourage Black people in Bermuda to develop a relationship with African people in Bermuda to create economic opportunities with Bermuda and the African continent. In other words, we can do the same thing that white Bermuda does in order to use immigration for their benefit. In other words, let's have a different conversation. Let's stop saying no, and let's see how everything that we do going forward could be mutually beneficial to all. But what's got to be understood is that a man doesn't respect you unless you respect yourself, and God doesn't help those who don't help themselves. So Black people, we need to put on our armor and get ready to hustle and do what we're going to do so our families can survive. And we have to give that same leeway to white Bermuda to survive and hustle. And when we all are hustling, maybe we all can eat from the same table and break bread and find that, hey, we actually could be peaceful and harmonious because it's not a zero-sum game. One not losing and they're winning. It just takes proper conversations based on honesty and truth.
Two questions as we count down here. One from our viewers, and Elizabeth, I'm going to be sorry because I'm probably going to butcher your last name, even though we've met and talked before. Elizabeth Vario. What is your view on the sugar tax, and do you believe that it was a smart move And what other taxes do you think would be more beneficial in terms of raising revenue?
I think we think that the sugar tax was a foolish move. I mean, I could say stupid, but it was a foolish move that has a tremendous negative impact on the whole economy. I mean, I just went and got a little ginseng soft drink and it cost $4. That's unbelievable. In other words, the sugar tax has just raised the cost of living in the country. It hasn't helped anyone. It has no correlation to health and wellness, and that shows that politicians have to be careful in using the tool of taxation to add an unnecessary burden on the people of this country. And so what we are proposing overall is to have a low tax environment, not just low tax for international business, but low tax for the domestic economy, low tax for Mr. and Mrs. Bermuda, right? That means if a lower taxation, we need to have a lower cost of government. That ensures that we have more money in the pockets of the people who produce that wealth, Mr. and Mrs. Bermuda. And so we feel that a lower tax regime overall is one of the key components of our pro-growth policies that can stimulate our economy. And where can we get additional revenues? We would say we can take the approach of having lower cost government, lower regulations, and lower taxation will naturally stimulate the innovative and creative juices of the people of this country. They know what the market deserves and wants. Give them the opportunity to compete. Give them the opportunity to create wealth and take risks. And then you will see through a low tax rate, even if it's a consumption tax, like sales tax, et cetera, that our revenues over time would increase because we have more persons participating in the economy, both through immigration and through our own human capital development. And with more people participating, more wealth being created, everyone benefits from it. And so instead of clamping down on the people, we're saying free up and let the people be creative and help ourselves navigate through this tumultuous period.
Okay, I promise you 3 more questions and we're down to 1. The last one. Some people are surprised you're running in 36 instead of around White Hill, where you have a lot of family. Why 36?
I started in 36. When the Honorable Eugene Cox passed away, that's when I entered into politics as a Congo Dread Rastaman. Okay, yeah, I sure did. And 20 of you, I'm bold now, yeah, but 20 persons put their name forward for the primary to replace Mr. Cox. Michael Scott won that primary. I came dead last. I didn't get 1 vote, right? And the other 18 persons got a few votes here and there. But what I recognized at that point, subsequently, is that no one came out to help Michael Scott canvass. I certainly did, because that was my opportunity to learn. And that was my first connection in terms of canvassing, was for the good people of constituency 36. So that was my political route. Now, in terms of White Hill, yes, everyone knows that I am a Summer City SBRC all day, every day, right? And everyone would know that White Hill in 32 or 33, I could have ran in those constituents. I chose not to. I just chose not to. I chose to run because Christina Story, Dr. Story, she stays out Rack Hill. And so when she showed up, she's like, listen, Mark, I want to run in 33. Okay, no problem. You can run in 33. And when it came to 32, I just felt that it would be better for me to run in 36 because I just have a choice. Let's put it that way. And I'm comfortable to run in any constituency in the country from St. George's to Somerset. Clearly, 32, 33, 34, 35, and 36 will be, you can consider to be my base because I'm from Somerset, I'm from the West End. But there was no other considerations strategically as to why I chose 36 instead of 32.
Okay. Well, we appreciate your busy time. The election's only 3 days away. I just want to thank you for being on with us today. And then hopefully tomorrow we're going to have some more of your candidates
Sure.
on so that they can talk and give their views to the public, and they can hear what they have to say. But really,
Sure. I appreciate your time, and I apologize for the late start and the miscommunications early this morning.
okay, no worries.
Okay.
It's not, if that's the worst thing that happens to me today, I'm going to have a great day.
Yeah, tell me about it.
This is a reminder from Burr News. The election's on Thursday. Please go out and let your voice be heard and vote. I'm your host this morning, Don Burgess, and with FDM leader Marc Bean, and we both hope that you have a beautiful day.
Yes, indeed.